Good afternoon, and thank you for joining the Blueberry Educational Conference as part of the 2021 Virtual Southeast Regional Fruit and Vegetable Conference. My name is Kim Post, a County Extension Agent with the University of Georgia, and I will be your moderator for this presentation. I'd like to thank Meister Media for sponsoring the 2021 Blueberry Educational Conference. Let's watch this short video provided by Meister Media. Pesticide CEU and CCA credits are available for most presentations offered during the live Southeast Regional Conference. Check the Pesticide CEU guide for a list of approved presentations and participating states. The Pesticide CEU guide is located in the Event Resources tab under the Media Player. The guide is also available at the Resources Center located on the main menu of the conference platform. Please note, pesticide credits will only be available for registered attendees and only during the live conference. Credits will not be available for on-demand viewing. There is a simple three-step process to receive pesticide CEU and CCA credits. First, go to the audience chat box located on the left side of your screen and type your first name, last name, and the states for which you are requesting credits. Again, go to the audience chat box located on the left side of your screen and type your first name, last name, and the state that you need credits for. You will need to do this for every presentation to request CEU credits. The second step is to sign out at the end of every presentation. So to sign out, you go to the audience chat box again and type your first name, last name, and your state. You will be reminded to sign out at the end of the presentation. The third step is to complete the pesticide CEU registration. You only have to complete this registration one time during the conference, and this is not required with every presentation. To access the pesticide CEU registration web link, open the Pesticide CEU guide on the Event Resources tab under the Media Player. The pesticide CEU registration link is located on the front cover of the guide. This presentation is actually going to be live. So Renee and I will be doing it live. After that, we'll have the Q&A. So we would like to thank our sponsors before we proceed. You can visit them in the virtual trade show and the featured products pavilion. Lastly, don't forget to join us each morning for coffee chats and each evening for networking. You can check the conference agenda for details. Now, I'd like to introduce Renee Holland, the Area Extension Agent in Commercial Blueberry Production with the University of Georgia, and she'll be speaking about blueberry pruning and associated diseases. Renee?
Thank you. I'm glad to be kicking off the Blueberry Conference this year with a topic that I get a lot of questions about, and that is on pruning. Just a brief review, most of our Georgia blueberry growers are fully aware of this, but for other people that may be logged in today, just wanted to review blueberries are a perennial woody shrub. They produce those indigo colored berries that are so healthy for us that we like. They are members of the Ericaceae family, and that's very important for us to know for Georgia because those types of plants do well in acidic, infertile soil, which are, the soil types that we have here near the Okefenokee Swamp in Georgia. There are two species of blueberries that we grow commercially in Georgia, Southern High Bush, interspecific Vaccinium corymbosum interspecific hybrids. They tend to be more early blooming and ripening, and also Rabbit Eye, Vaccinium virgatum. It's a native blueberry species to South Georgia, and they bloom later and ripen later as well. So what can pruning do for you? Why do we want to do this? It helps develop the proper shape and form of the plant, especially with our mechanical harvest of blueberries for the fresh market. We want a good shape and form of the blueberries to allow those beater bars to go through the blueberries. Also to allow, we want a narrow base on the plant as well to allow the fish scales to have a nice succinct closure there at the bottom and try to reduce ground loss that way. Also, pruning helps ensure good fruit quality. I think this is something people forget about. It's really, you want some nice, strong shoots and canes. You want a good variety of age of canes and keep rotating out the older canes with some newer canes and allowing new cane growth. This helps ensure good fruit quality. Also, it enhances the longevity of the plant. So over time, if you never remove the older canes, they become unproductive and that will reduce your yield in the field. So you want to focus on enhancing the longevity of the plant as well. Pruning can also help minimize damage and disease. You can help prune out diseased tissue or tissue that's been damaged from mechanical injury. So that all helps with the health of the plant as well. So ultimately, the purpose is to help balance between the plant structure and the fruit quality that you get from that structure of the plant. And there's a really good article out there. It's a UGA Extension publication focused on homeowner blueberries, actually, but it was written about pruning for fruit crops, and that was written by Eric Smith, Bob Westerfield, and Daria Chavez. And you'll see some of the information from that bulletin in this presentation today, but I just want to let you know that's another good resource online to check out as well. Again, we want balance. We want a good strong bush, especially, you know, those that are going through mechanical harvest, that we need a good, strong, sturdy root system and a good, strong framework in that plant. And then also that translates into good fruit quality as well. We want to remove that dead, damaged, and diseased wood, as I previously mentioned. And of course, the big focus that we really drive when we do educational meetings for growers and county agents is that we're trying to open up the canopy of the plant to allow light penetration. And that allows that plant to carry that fruit to maturity. And I'm sure several growers can tell you from time and time again that the rows of blueberry plants that are close to a tree line and are shaded out for a good portion of the day, they tend to have lower productivity compared to blueberry plants that are receiving full sunlight. So that opening of the canopy is very critical for that light penetration and subsequent higher yields and better fruit productivity. Pruning also helps invigorate new growth. So new growth means new shoots, younger canes, stronger shoots. And we'll talk a little bit more in the coming slides about kind of the length you're looking there for these different shoots. But you want enough shoot growth that's not overly long, that it has minimal branching, but it's not overly short, that it's weak and can't provide proper water and nutrients to that crop load. And it's a bit of an art form, and there's a lot to consider. The technique and the timing will depend on the variety that you have and the desired results that you want as well. And so I'll try to make some of that clear today, but again, it's an art form. It's a really good topic to get with your local county extension agent and come up with your strategy for your particular species and varieties in your field. Something to consider there, but there's definitely strategy to it. What you do with that variety this year and how you prune it this year may not be the same for next year, etc. Let's first talk about some pruning tools. It's important to properly select and clean your tools. You want to select the right tool for the job. So pictured here, that top photo there, a lot of commercial growers will recognize that as the BTS chopper. It does a lot of the hedging activities that we have, the hedging cuts on the blueberry plant, where we're trying to maintain that plant stature that's reachable for hand harvest, or a stature that is good for mechanical harvesting that can go through that tunnel. We want to maintain an appropriate height for the species. And the way it works is it has these mower blades on the sides and also on the top. And sometimes it can cut flat on the top. Sometimes it has the capability to do a rooftop cut. And I'm going to show you a photo of that in just a moment. But that's something we use very commonly for the hedging pruning practice in commercial blueberry production. And then also we have cane pruning. And on the first slide, there was actually a photo, and I'll show you another photo in a moment here, but there are pneumatic loppers. It's good to consider the length of the handles of the loppers. That's on the bottom there. That's the photo on the right-hand side. So the longer those handles are, the more torque you can get for larger canes, older canes. And, some growers, they actually have folks that are very talented with pruning and will go through and hand prune things with even the smaller hand pruners. But they're going to need the right tool depending on what type of wood that they are pruning for. You want to make sure the tool stays clean and clear of debris. You want to make a clean cut with those tools. And so it's, of course, important to maintain the equipment and sharpen the blades properly. And also, it doesn't necessarily mean you sharpen all the blades. On these bypass type of pruners, you're actually typically only one blade is to be sharpened. So just make sure you pay attention to instructions when you get your types of tools and equipment, and make sure you maintain and sharpen them properly. Disinfection, that is a really important practice for pruning tools. And again, we're going to touch a little bit more on this later in the presentation, but we want to protect against the transfer of viruses and disease-causing organisms. There's a couple things I wanted to mention right up front that you can kind of jot these down, but you can disinfect your tools using a diluted alcohol mix. For example, 1 part alcohol to 4 parts water, or you can use a diluted bleach spray solution. A lot of folks do that, and you can do 1 part bleach to 9 parts water in that case. But again, please get with your local extension agent and your specialist to come up with a plan for disinfecting your tools, and make sure you do that, because we've definitely seen it time and time again, pathogens spread through the field through the movement of this type of use of tools and equipment. I'm actually really proud of Georgia. A lot of the folks that do the custom hedging with that BTS chopper, for example, they are very good to bleach the equipment between fields and between farms. So that's a really good practice, and I'm glad we have already adopted that in Georgia. But don't forget about it with those hand pruners. Some special considerations. For example, you don't want to prune too early. I have homeowners sometimes that contact me about this because they get confused on when they're supposed to prune. In blueberry production, commercial production, we prune post-harvest with the hedging cuts, and then oftentimes do the cane pruning in the dormant season. Or if we're trying to do some rejuvenative work, we may do some cane pruning post-harvest as well. And that may depend also on constraints for getting labor as well. We may do that in the summer as well too. But you don't want to prune too early, because then obviously you'll cut off your flower buds that are on the bush or blooms, and that's your fruit set for that year. You also don't want to prune too late, because again, we put on another set of buds in the fall, and you'll prune those out if you wait too late to get around to your pruning then. But sometimes that's done strategically, and we definitely have to worry about spring frosts in Georgia. And so sometimes people do prune a little on the later side post-harvest to help delay harvest for that particular variety. So that's where strategy and kind of the art is involved. So just keep that in mind. And, we don't really advise people to prune in cold weather. Obviously, we do cane pruning during the dormant season. But if you're going to have sub-freezing temperatures that week, maybe that's not the best week to cane prune your blueberries, because we want to prevent winter injury there. Also consider the practice of pruning causes wounds, right, on the plant. And those can cause, infection courts for pathogens to enter through that wound. And it's something that's been proven scientifically in other crops very well. For example, wine grapes, they're definitely justified in spraying a fungicide after pruning activities. And so we've already started on the research side trying to show and prove this with blueberries, just to give us some more confidence with that recommendation to growers. If there's no need to spray a fungicide after pruning, we wanted to make sure that wasn't the case. And of course, with the hedging trials I presented a couple years ago to the group, to the growers, you've seen that there is a good justification for using a fungicide spray post-hedging pruning activities. Another consideration is the weather at that time. That would be another good study to conduct, just to show that with our humid, moist air in Georgia and a lot of rain, if we have a lot of rain splash, that can spread pathogen spores. you're definitely justified in making a fungicide application, and you want to do it as soon as possible after pruning. At the same time is ideal. Some equipment can do that, but I know sometimes people have to go in there the day or two after to try to get everything sprayed as well. Just do the best you can with that, of course. But what we're trying to do is buy that plant some time to allow that wound to heal after that wound has been made. We've been talking about hedging a lot, and I'm going to go ahead and try to wrap up some of that. Again, as I mentioned, there's different strategies. You may need to use a different strategy depending on the different type of cultivar you have. I know we don't really produce anil so much anymore, but star is still something in commercial production. And a lot of times we know that the fruiting wood for that particular variety is on the side of the plant. So if you do a rooftop hedge, you want to make sure that's shallow and not very steep, because you're not wanting to cut into that fruiting wood on the side. A lot of that fruiting wood 4-star is on the previous year's buds. So that's something that you may not prune back every year, or you want to make sure you either flat top cut it on the top, or make sure that rooftop hedge is shallow versus very steep. But overall, hedging is a good practice. We definitely need some more data and research on some of the newer blueberry varieties to give you some guidance on pruning those newer varieties and what's appropriate for those. But there's some good literature out there showing the justification of hedging and pruning. There was more disease that was found in non-pruned treatments versus the treatments that were pruned. Dr. Jeff Williamson down there at University of Florida, that's some of their data. They also had another paper where they showed that with summer pruning, regardless of when you got around to it or the intensity of it, it did tremendously help with leaf disease. So that's another consideration as well. One thing I definitely get a lot of calls on is that these really long, stringy shoots that have minimal branching. You know, the growers are concerned, how's this going to affect my yield? I have these long shoots, but not very good branching here in terms of increasing my yield. So one thing you have to consider, the severity of the pruning. So the more severe you are with the pruning, and if you water it and push it with fertilizer, next thing you know, you've gotten busy, you went to the beach, you turn around, and your shoot lengths are pretty long there, and you probably needed to go back in and do maybe even a second hedging for the season, or maybe turn down the fertilizer to not push it so hard. You want young shoots. You want young, strong shoots, but these are getting to be too long, and it really decreases your ability to have some nice branching there too. So you have to be on the lookout for that. So that's why a lot of times I say there's a lot of strategy in this. You have to look at your variety. You have to take a look at your water and fertilizing and the severity of the pruning that you need to do, and consider all of that when you're trying to decide what to do with your different fields and varieties. Cane renewal pruning. This is the apparatus I wanted to show you in a more close-up view. Special thank you to Bill Klein from North Carolina State University for this photo. And he has some really nice photos showing what we're shooting for with the pruning in the coming slides here. But you can see this man here has a pneumatic lopper in his hand, and this is a tractor-driven device that can go through the field and just help, instead of going out there with this heavy backpack, they can go through and cane prune. So this diagram is a really good diagram just to show you what we're shooting for. You can see the plant on the left is a lot of branching and a lot of canes, and it's even shaded out, it appears, and there's no foliage on this plant, so you can imagine with foliage, too much shading there. But what we're shooting for is what's on the right. Nice cane separation, nice open canopy, and nice strong shoots. So with cane renewal pruning, Bill Klein, we've had some nice pruning workshops, and I'm sure we'll do some more in the future, but he talks about that basal area being 8 inches is ideal because you want to keep it as narrow as possible for mechanical harvest, but 12 inches will work as well. That is suitable for basal pruning as well. I also have growers that kind of play around with where they cut. A lot of times we really urge people to cut all the way down to the base. But sometimes, depending on if you did get behind with your cane pruning, I really recommend you go ahead and start that in the earlier years and don't wait until they're 4 or 5 years old to start cane pruning, because by then the canopy is so established that if you cut canes out, you may not necessarily allow for a nice shoot to go in an upright direction. So sometimes they take that up off the ground. It would be a good area for research for us to kind of decide what might be best on that. But overall, you want a nice narrow base. You want to remove that twiggy growth. This photo is a really good photo to show, what we start with here on the left, lots of canes, lots of twiggy growth. And then on the right, we want that nice cane separation, that open canopy. You'll notice that the shoots are not really short and stubby. So you don't want those shoots overly short because they're unsupportive of a good fruit quality on the branches. And you want to allow more space for sunlight penetration into that canopy as well. This is a really good diagram to really illustrate what I'm talking about with weak versus strong shoots. The diagram here on the left, you can see these really short twiggy growth. These are weak shoots. That's hard to support a nice big, good fruit quality fruit of blueberry. So you want them to be a little longer, right? But we don't want to get as long as what was in the previous slides I showed earlier. But that's what we're shooting for. Before pruning, it may look like this. After pruning, we want it to look more like this. Spacing is something I like to talk about for a moment here. It's wise to select the appropriate canes and lateral shoots that are going to lead to better distribution of fruit on the bush. You want that spaced out. You want there to be sunlight within those spaces. You don't want the overshading, which in the picture on the left, you can kind of see how they're planted so closely together and how it's so dark in that canopy. That's not what you want. And there's other considerations other than just fruit quality or fruit production, but if you have too heavy of a canopy, that reduces your spray coverage, and it can also make it difficult for the harvesters to reach. So this photo illustrates that this grower recognized that in his pine bark beds that the plants were planted way too close together and there was a lot of shading. But it's just a nice photo that shows you what shading can do. You can see, you can cut these plants down to the ground. I sometimes get calls from people trying to just rejuvenate an old field and see what they can do with it. A lot of times homeowners or people who've newly acquired some older fields or plantings, you can cut them back to the ground. And if they have a strong root system, as you can see on the photo on the left, they will start to put on new canes and come up again. In the photo on the right, that just kind of shows you again the shading, and that's definitely going to reduce productivity in that plant. So that's something you're wanting to be aware of. Briefly, let's just talk about plant pathogens right quick. Of course, those hedging cuts create open wounds. The intensity of the hedging activity can cause older canes to become broken, and skinned areas and broken canes can serve as entry points for pathogens such as Botryosphaeria. That one is a lethal disease of blueberries, so it's definitely one we keep an eye out on, and globally it's become more and more of an emerging threat in agricultural crops. So I have been working on this actually through my PhD for a while now, and we're trying to keep sharp tabs on this. But it's caused by a fungal complex and multiple organisms. It can cause systemic branch dieback. A lot of growers are familiar with the green canopy and the blighted stem. That's something that is kind of indicative of it in the field. And then also if you cut into the cane, you'll have that kind of triangular pecan discoloration in the stem. But it's often associated with wounding and also plant stress. So we can often see these in young fields that are pushed very heavily with fertilizer. And it can be most damaging in those younger fields, also due to heavy pruning. That's a report from Bill Klein. Okay, last slide here. I just want to kind of end this with talking about vascular pathogens. This is something we don't have a tremendous issue with in Georgia yet, but we don't want it to come up here. It's in Florida. It's a bacterium, and it can move from plant to plant on pruning equipment or shears. So sanitization is absolutely paramount. So keep that in mind with that pathogen. And I'll turn it back over to Kim, our moderator. Thank you, Kim.
Thank you, Renee. We are now going to answer questions from our audience. So again, you can type those questions into the questions box at the bottom of your screen and hit send. Also, as a reminder, if you're requesting pesticide credits from this presentation, don't forget to sign out, enter your first name, last name, and state in that audience chat box. So we do have one question already for you, Renee, and that is, how far down do you consider the base?
Okay, when I'm talking about the base of the plant, I'm talking about where the soil line meets the lower part of the canes there, down at ground level. That's what I'm talking about there. So when I'm talking about basal pruning, I'm talking about cutting the cane out from the base of the plant where, you know, blueberries have those multiple canes there.
All right, thank you. I don't see any other questions in the box. We'll give it just a moment.
And people that are listening in, if you want to email me, my email address is reneemh@uga.edu. Be happy to answer questions that way as well.
We do have another question, Renee. How often do you recommend to sanitize pruners?
Well, it's one of those situations between practicality and what we would like to see. Ideally, we would like you to sanitize between really every few cuts, but ideally between each plant. That way you don't transfer pathogens from plant to plant. But when the larger equipment that's hedging and that sort of thing, a lot of times it will sanitize between field and field, or at the very least, between farm and farm.
Okay. And what is recommended spacing on a new planting of southern high bush to avoid that shading that you talked about?
Okay. I really like and prefer 3 feet. You will often see people do 2.5 feet. I've seen them 2 feet apart. I've seen them very closely apart. But the problem with that is that you have a lot of shading if they get overgrown and pushed too heavily with fertilizer. And then also if one plant becomes sick, it can root graft and transmit something to the neighboring plant when they're that close together. So I prefer 3 feet for southern high bush.
And can you say again your email address? Someone has asked for it.
reneemh@uga.edu. Or you can also Google me UGA blueberry agent.
Okay. And we have time for one last question. Has any work been done on making cuts higher on the bush to keep a mature crown for machine harvest?
Yes, I briefly mentioned that in the presentation. I do know a grower that has made a cut higher up on the plant, but the reasoning he gave that to me is because he had waited far too long before he started cane pruning in his planting, and the plants were several years old. So he was trying to give them a chance to have some sunlight reach that for putting on new canes, starting at that cut. But no, there's not been a lot of work on that, but thank you for that. We'll take a look at that.
Okay, that's about all the time we have. Thank you again, Renee, for your time and expertise. To all the attendees, thank you for attending. Don't forget to sign out to get your pesticide credits in the audience chat box. And all presentations will be available for you to access until April 30th, 2021. So feel free to come back if you've missed a presentation or just want to rewatch one, or if you need to search for a service or product provider in the virtual trade show. Again, and thank you for your participation. And this concludes Renee's blueberry pruning presentation. Thank you.